Welcome again to the Tech Factor podcast by Purple Quarter. We'd like to welcome Narendra Babu in our podcast. I'm going to call you Naren because you said that I'm allowed to call you Naren. So, how are you doing today, Naren?
I'm doing great. Thanks for inviting me here.
Thank you so much for coming over to our office. I know you guys work from home, but you made it to our office. So, thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.
Awesome. So, Naren, just for the audiences to know about, I'm sure they already know about you, but I'm still going to give a glimpse about what you've done so far. A lovely journey. You've looked at Microsoft, Google, Walmart, all the biggies, and landed in PayU as a CTO. So, I want to, talk a little bit about the journey with some of these companies, Microsoft, Google, Walmart, and then maybe we branch and talk about PayU being the startup ecosystem.
No, it's a fantastic journey. I've learned a lot, met a lot of people whom I respect, still keep in touch with all of them. And each of the companies has taught me different things, whether it is culture, whether it is specific technology, whether it is business domain. I think sometimes you feel that you look back and feel that, hey, look, this is a great set of opportunities that I was given. Hopefully, I made the most out of it. I think it's a fun ride to have been in all these companies.
Sure. Is there anything from a cultural standpoint that you saw was, of course, 3 different operating procedures for each of these companies. Microsoft has its own share, then Google adds a very different flavor, and you have Walmart, which has been around for a very long period of time. So can you talk about what did you see similarities? What do you like from any of these companies as well?
Absolutely. I think, the one common thread that connects all these companies is that, in my view at least, is they are primarily talent-based companies, right? So they look at talent as their primary asset.
Sure.
And the amount of flexibility that they provide you for growth, learning, building connections, and even so much that, I would recall my conversations in Walmart when I was about to leave was all about, hey, what can you do in Walmart? How can we help you, learn different things and what opportunities we can create? And even when I said, no, I still want to pursue it. So okay, if you decide to come back, there are other opportunities that we can create for you, right? So I think that is a common thread that binds all these companies. It's the great judges of talent, right? The other strains that I pick is that, they look at their specific problems at scale, right? So if you, for example, in the early days of Google, right? So you look at different problems that the company is trying to solve. If it isn't a problem which is complex and needs to be solved at scale, people would probably not get into it, right? So even you take Walmart, right? So you come up with a smaller opportunity, but you always think about, hey, you have 5,000 stores, you have probably 300 or so distribution centers. Are you making an impact at that scale, right?
Sure.
So, or if you look at the consumer base, it's said that, every around 95% of U.S. population lives around 50 miles off a Walmart store, right? So you're touching those many consumers, right? And Microsoft back then was kind of pretty much the de facto operating system for every end user. It may not be the enterprise, but at least end users mostly was a Microsoft shop back then. All of these companies thought scale, right? So, and they were trying to solve problems at that level, right? So these are things that, those are takeaways for us, right? So think big, go after them. So the other thing is that during the course of these experiences, one thing I picked up is that normally you talk about skill and will, right? So something that you have and you have learned in your college, but there are things that define your personality, right? Your success depends a lot of times on your will, right? So these are things could be like ownership, accountability, commitment, even communication, patience levels, how do you build connections, collaboration. And the good thing is, like, these are stuff that if you're conscious, you can actually make a lot of changes in your own personality.
Correct.
And you'll quickly see that folks who are assessing you quickly gravitate towards the will part of it, right?
Correct.
So because it's a given that more or less everybody is equipped with adequate tech skills, right? So it is these other things that matter a lot.
Sure.
Right, and they tend to, over a long time, produce phenomenal results, right? So the performance assessment and all of these, people call it by different names. Like, for example, in PayU, we have something called as PayU behaviors, right? So which is the same thing, essentially. Like, you look at it saying, how do you react on ambiguity, decision making, right? So collaboration kind of things. And these play a big role in succeeding at these organizations.
Sure. So, what piqued my interest while you were discussing all of this is you spoke about how some of these larger organizations thought for the larger vision. You're thinking about scale in 20 years to come. You're actually doing adaptive thinking on how do I do this 10 years from now? How do you go ahead and apply this to a fast-paced startup? Right? I'm still considering PayU as a startup, though they've grown in terms of what they do. So how do you go ahead and apply this? Because there's already a certain way of thinking. There is a thought process, right? So how do you manage to do that?
Yeah. So see, at PayU, it is an interesting combination of it's a somewhat of a startup, but somewhat of a mid-sized company.
Sure.
Right. So I think for us, the most important thing is to keep in mind the scale at which we operate is actually pretty high. Like, if you look at it, the amount of GMV that goes through us is substantial, right? So and thereby the institutional mechanisms we have to build to launch out new products. See, in the business of money, like, you have to be super careful, right? So we have to make sure that we have to think through end to end for every new product, like starting from making sure that you're bringing a lot of value to your merchant,
right?
Making sure that you protect your end consumer, right? So, like, for example, it's very easy if we make a mistake in some KYC validation and some not so good merchant makes it into our system, right? So there are end consumers who are paying might think that, hey, there's a PayU brand and we are protected, right? So we don't want to breach that trust. How do you protect end consumers? And then the third dimension is, how do you comply with the local laws and governance, right?
Correct.
So it's a constantly evolving situation, right? So we have to think of all of these things as we build out new products. So it's a game of balancing between the safety requirements of the country that you operate in, and also making sure that you're growing fast and bringing value at every stage that merchants are adopting your products.
Got it.
Right. So it's a mix and match of these is what we have to look at.
Sure. So PayU is slightly complicated, right? Because you have 3 businesses that are run internally. We were just discussing that. Do you want to talk about when you're actually looking at regulations for each of these verticals? They could be slightly different, yeah, because you have to apply different things. So from a technology perspective, how does the tech stack work? Is it separate? You have like a common core platform? Could you talk about that?
Right. So the good thing about PayU set of companies is that we are fairly loosely coupled, right?
Okay.
So in other words, we want companies to be agile and decide their course of business actions. Now, while you do that, it's always possible that you might create some redundancy in the organization.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, you're trying to move fast and make sure that you're creating the right value for your customer base. That said, the tech groups of all of these 3 companies come together virtually to kind of figure out what makes sense for us to collaborate with, and how do we bring in efficiency in all of these 3 organizations, right? The same points that you said. There might be learnings from a audit standpoint, compliance, or even your tech platform, right? So how can we bring synergies across these 3 things? There's no hard and fast rule. It is kind of a endeavor to bring in efficiency, and see, at the end of the day, engineers are also interested in solving newer and newer business problems, right? So
Correct.
you don't want to burden our engineers to be working on the same problems in 3 different places, right?
Absolutely.
So that becomes a challenge for the leadership team,
Right.
to create these opportunities while everybody is optimizing for their growth, but yet how can we come together and look at what are those options for us to bring in efficiency.
So this is Lazypay.
Correct.
You have PayU, and the third one is Wilmore, right?
Wilmore.
Wilmore, right?
Yes.
So if you can talk about what these three separate from a technology standpoint, how do they merge? Do you also look at merging of data? Do you actually utilize data so that you can power it up and come up with a new vertical? What are your thoughts on from a technology standpoint? I'm super curious.
No, so these are 3 separate entities, right?
Okay.
At a data level, we are not allowed by law to
share data.
right?
Okay.
So the data is completely separate.
Okay.
So there is no collaboration of data there. It's like, even from technology standpoint, I would say it's relatively new that this is an effort that we are trying to start, because if you look at the journey, right? So each one were focused on certain things so far. It is only now that we are coming together to see like the certain level of maturity that each of our organizations have come to. See, PayU payments focuses on our merchant business, right?
Correct.
So most of the capabilities that we build are centered around that, right?
Correct.
So how do you give those capabilities to
And the
merchants?
scale is pretty large there. So.
Yeah, we have been around for quite a few years, and we are one of the biggest players, like probably in the top 2-3, right?
Right.
And if you look at the marquee event that happens around Diwali sales, right? So we're one of the big players there. We
Right.
partner with a lot of key merchants,
Sure.
and we power their payment solutions on that day.
Correct.
When
When there's a spike.
when there is a peak
Yeah.
spike that's going on, right? And there are other like IPL matches, you have these Swiggy orders
Sure.
that shoot through the roof and so on. So,
Okay.
that's what PayU payments focuses, right? So our data is revolving around merchants, right?
Right.
So, and kind of we manage that separately from reporting and making sure that settlements and refunds and all of that happen with banks. So we work with banks to ensure that all the money is settled. Our Wibmo is actually a solution provider in the context of banks. In fact, it is actually hosted within the bank boundaries, right? So it's not even Wibmo's data, right? It is actually banks, and in many cases we are hosted in their data centers.
Okay.
Right. So PayU Finance is an end consumer facing lending product,
Right.
So we collaborate with them, like when we have a lending lead, like we work with them to provide a lead. So their data is around how do we assess the credit score, what kind of credit can we provide our end consumers, and so on. So their data will be slightly different, right?
Got it.
So the challenges for companies tend to be different. Right? So like, for example, our PayU Finance is a lot more front-end heavy kind of a company, because you need to be with customers. So you have to be very polished when it comes to user interface and how do you help make it easier for customers. Whereas we tend to be more of a API kind of an platform, that we want our merchants to integrate with our APIs, less of UI, right? So because merchant is doing the UI work, and only when it comes to payment that we help them. So we tend to be more of an API based technology. But at the core of it, it all depends on what kind of throughput, what kind of scale we can support. Like I said, for us, even if you're down for 5 minutes at your peak time, it has a lot of negative implications, not only for us, but for our merchants who trust us a lot, right? So how do you protect their brand value, right? So that becomes very important. So our systems have to be highly performant, highly scalable, right? So sometimes you hit these peaks, and your system, you should be able to scale them up fairly quickly.
Sure.
Right. So that's kind of the rough landscape of
so
these
if you were to look at applying the first piece that you said, you spoke about how these larger companies looked at scale. So when you look at PayU's vertical, so do you see from a technology standpoint, have you already planned 10 years ahead? How are you looking at this as you're donning the main hat, right? So
that is the goal for me. I've been here for about 9-10 months,
sure.
And Anirban, our CEO, has asked, saying, "Hey, can you build a platform for the next 7 to 10 years?"
Okay.
Right? I think the previous team had done a good job, which has helped us sustain for so long.
Correct.
Right? Obviously, we are hitting physical limits in terms of what one or two instances can support. Right? So we have now go to a truly distributed model if you were to plan for the next 7-8 years of growth, because see, there is the amount of financial growth that's happening, especially in the digital financial growth, is just mind-boggling, right? So with the introduction of UPI and people getting onto banks, and now more or less like it's a given that almost any big merchant needs to have an online presence.
Correct.
Right. So much so that even jewelry is being sold online. Right?
True that.
So the environment is conducive for growth, right? And B, I think like this is also allowing companies like PayU and other companies to create a lot of financial products to make it more and more valuable to kind of start using the digital products.
Sure.
Right?
So are there new products that are coming up?
Yeah, I think we are looking at like, for example, neobanking is one area that
Nice.
We certainly are working on, and again, it's a regulated space, so we want to work with the relevant stakeholders to make sure that we are doing the right things, and that's one area certainly that we are trying to make progress on.
Sure.
Payouts is another area that we already live, and we are trying to scale it up as a business. So yeah, I think offer engine. We have an offer engine. Basically, we bring the merchants, we bring the banks and the brand together, and we provide a platform for all of them to collaborate and provide offers.
Oh,
right?
wow.
Right. So this becomes a seamless way for them to create the necessary offers and put them on sale, and so you don't have to.
So you become like aggregators for people who want to make offers.
Correct, right.
Okay.
So, but like you bring these three entities together, and
Sure.
you say that, hey, look, like you'll typically see that you have a sale of OnePlus on Amazon, and if you buy in HDFC credit card, you get a discount, right? Like all these three people have to come together, and
Sure.
this is called as an offer engine, and we facilitate creating these offers and run it for the merchants, right?
Right.
So there is a slew of such products and more products that we will continue to work on.
Right. So when you look at Lazypay, the second, because I'm assuming you manage all three.
No, we actually have different teams
Okay.
that,
So then I'm not going to dwell into that then. All right. So if I were to look at it from the outside, right, and if I were to look at just PayU as the platform that we're discussing, Naren, if I can ask you from a perspective of cross-country transactions, which are becoming extensively popular, and with the regulations, how has that impacted PayU? This was a question that was being asked by some of the founders yesterday over a WhatsApp chat, and we were recommending different platforms to use, right? So just wanted to check with you, what are your...
Yeah, see, when you say cross-country, as in from one country to another?
To other, yeah,
Correct.
from India to, when you're...
Correct, right.
Yeah.
So I think there are two parts to this. So one is obviously working with the vast networks of financial instruments, like whether it's an issuer and other networks, to make sure that we build the bridges to support as many different instruments that are supported, right? So
Sure.
no matter where you are, like
Right.
it's working, right? So that is the core of PayU, right? Any payment aggregator, that's what you do. You have the integrations with all these institutions, right? In whichever country, right? So, and you make it easier for consumers to just go ahead and pay. So you take the merchant, you take that burden off of the merchant, so that they don't need to worry about, okay, is it Visa? Is it Visa from which bank is it being issued, and which country, which currency you're operating in.
Sure.
All of that burden is solved by companies like PayU, right? So that's the first thing.
Sure.
The second part of it is compliance, right? So like anytime you're doing a cross country stuff, it also, there is a whole bunch of compliance that we need to do. There are anti-money laundering stuff that we have to take. So how do you make sure that you put the necessary checks and balances that you are allowing only legitimate transactions, but blocking spurious transactions, right? So I think there, again, we have partnered with our Wilmore as our technology provider. They have built a sophisticated fraud machine, right? So that, checks, if these rules are, these transactions are valid, or if they need to be flagged, and somebody has to go take a look at these transactions and what actions that they have to take.
And is it like a quick?
It's a real-time stuff, right? So as the transaction, you want to make sure that you let people know at the time of transaction that there is a problem, right? Or you block it, right? So sometimes you also do it offline, but the intent is to make it as quick as possible, right? So these are the two things that we have to do. The problem of supporting these is not just cross-country. Even within India, the sheer number of banks that you have to work with, and they are constantly changing.
Correct.
Right. So, like each probably state has their own regional banks, right? So it could be a Kerala Grameen Bank to a Jammu and Kashmir bank, right? So, and somebody is traveling here and they want to use their payment instrument to do a purchase, right? And like you don't want a mom and pop shop to worry about. Oh, I never thought of that.
Right.
So that's.
It's super interesting. It gets actually fairly complicated with integrations, I suppose.
Absolutely right. So see, like there are cards, there's net banking, there is UPI. Then you go by like the networks, whether it's MasterCard, Visa, Amex, Diners Club, and then you're looking at the banks, right? So it's a fairly comprehensive matrix that we have to make sure, right? And then you have merchants themselves that they integrate with us in very different ways.
Sure.
Right. So some have their own app and they want to just invoke. Some want to put our SDK there. So some want to do server to server integrations, right? So it's a comprehensive number of combinations that you have to make sure it's up and running all the time.
Right.
So that's puts a lot of demand on us.
Sure. Do you ever see merchants to have a one-click payment option coming up shortly?
As in,
I don't need to just put in my OTP, but it just stores my card, and you can go ahead and do the transaction as long as I approve as a customer.
The question to that really depends on regulation, right? So we can technology, you can do it, right? But what is allowed to be, like I don't know if you are familiar with this concept of tokenization, right? So today nobody is allowed to store credit card numbers without the consent of user, right? So even if you're storing, you have to store the token and not the actual card number. Right. So these are the things that we have to look into, right? So, however, in the case of net banking, that is a reality. So I see that there's already a solution where you can do a fingerprinting, and it'll allow you to do your transaction.
Right. But that's more for iOS users, right?
Right.
With Android, I'm not so sure. I'm not an Android user, so I don't know if.
No, I think there are solutions that are coming that will work for Android as well.
Interesting. So when you see this from a lens of how this will evolve, right, with UPI, which kind of changed the entire dynamics for I think financial transactions, right? No one even thought that I can actually do this with a single click sitting wherever. I mean, rural areas are using UPI. How do you think that kind of changed the game for you guys from a tech standpoint?
Yeah, I think it did two things, right? So one is it pushed the merchants to adopt digital transactions a lot more faster, right? Significantly faster. But obviously end customers are now more comfortable, everywhere, whether it's online or offline, you have these QR codes and people are
easier.
comfortable. Yeah. Right? But the bigger thing it did is get a lot of small merchants into the banking net, which were either underserved or not served before, right?
So everyone got a bank.
I mean, maybe there was a possibility, but it's just that people never opened an account. They didn't felt a need for that. Now that is a reality, right? So you're getting so many people into this net, right? So that creates a lot of opportunities for them to look at a lot of other financial products. Like a simple example could be that lending needs, right? So it was like, I'm sure you would know this, that if people had to borrow money before, it had to be at really steep interest rates, right?
Yeah,
so it might almost be at a daily kind of an interest rate. But now with their history of bank, becomes much easier for people to look at their credit worthiness and lend at a much more reasonable rates, right? And then add technology on top of that, it becomes easier to solve that at scale, right? So you look at it, you can make decisions, and you can do much more targeted notifications to users to get those, right? You obviously, work with them to minimize the defaulting and all of that. But these create the number of options that it creates for people to take advantage of the banking, like improvements that have happened. Like many people were not taking advantage of that, and now that creates a great platform, and I believe that can help the economy really well.
Absolutely, absolutely. While you were saying that, I was just thinking about the merchants, and some of these merchants that you work with are pretty large, right? Their transactions per day itself is quite, humongous. So, do you guys internally do analytics and send them something that for them to use as PayU, or you guys have not focused on that at all from?
No, see, we do analytics, and we actually work with a few companies to provide analytics for them where they have acquired. But see, some of the big companies, they probably themselves have their analytics, because we are downstream, right? So most of the data that we get is already it's there with them, and so that's on the bigger companies, right? But that said, I think there is the intelligence of other kinds, right? So whether it is anomaly transactions that we notice across sites, how do we notify that? Those are things that we are getting into, and we are detecting, and we are trying to see how we can notify people. And this is also a mandate that we need to notify any such things to the government, right? So I don't think we've gotten to a point where everybody is taking advantage of that, but there is an effort to now build kind of a central repository of doubtful transactions or any other data that we can get. But we also use analytics for our own marketing, right? So you look at all the products that we have. There is very interesting use cases of like which merchants are using what products, what other products they can use, what lift they can get, right? All of this you can analyze through our data, and we can start recommending to our sales team, saying that, hey, here are things that you can work with these merchants and help them. Maybe they can think about offering these products to their end consumers.
Right. Interesting. So Naren, I was also thinking of it from a perspective of e-commerce, internet to fintech. Two very different worlds. One world where you're dealing with people buying groceries and you're solving supply chain problem to deliver groceries or anything which is like the per transaction is of a very different value, versus a fintech where it's highly regulated. For you to switch over, would you be able to tell us, even for a technology person to look at that mindset shift on what were the top things that you had to switch over, while you had to focus on tech, the first stand-up that you had with your team?
Right. I think the things that I've learned is that, you have to work a lot more closely with auditors and government authorities in a fintech space than you would in an e-commerce space, right? So I think that requires a different mindset for people to start looking at products right from scratch, saying, hey, what are the checks and balances that I have to put in place in matters of money movement, right? So a small mistake can cost you a lot, right? Whereas in an e-commerce world, in any company, any mistake is bad, but your approach would be to let's go fast, right? So let's try it out and let's see what happens. You can always control the feature and so on and so forth. But in fintech, you have very less room to play around with that, right? So that is the biggest learning that I would have.
Sure.
Right. So the other learning is the sheer number of tech players that you have to interact with, whether it's merchants, whether it is banks, is quite high, right? So your technology team needs to be geared up, needs to have that muscle to deal with so many other tech entities, right? So in e-com world, that is not so much the case. You're mostly dealing with internally and you're building products. Yeah, there might be some products where might interact with other tech providers, but here this is almost a day-to-day job. Somebody will come and say that, hey, I have a sale going on, I want you to scale up, right? So and okay, so let me take care of that. Then the bank comes and says that, okay, we are building this new thing and we want you to integrate, right? So or government says that here's a new change, you have 6 months, you have to move over to this. And these are bi-directional discussions, right? So you have to engage with them, clarify your questions, like then you arrive at some understanding and then you take it
So it's
forward.
very high touch is what you're saying.
Correct.
Right? With each of these merchants that you deal with.
Correct.
So does customization also is high touch? I mean, does it not really, right? Or do you like put them into specific blocks depending on their domains?
When you say customization,
So let's say this guy, that it's an e-com, so their sales, there is periodicity, right? You can predict when their sales happen. Versus, let's say, somebody who comes with an offer, discount coupon offer.
Correct.
For Halloween, let's say, no one predicted that, but it's come up, right? No, it's so do you customize?
Yeah, so
on the
what
fly?
we try to do is we try to distill down each of these into core products that can be reused for those. Like you'll have a set of products that you can use for different use cases. Otherwise, it's very difficult for us to maintain code base for every merchant, right?
Correct.
So we don't do that. But you find categories and say that, okay, and see, the other thing is, we have to build highly configurable systems, right? So every merchant, think of this one engineer sitting with big board of switches, right? So okay, this merchant has all this switch configuration, this other merchant but the platform is the same. But based on the configuration, it tends to take different approaches.
But doesn't it get slightly complicated with the banking institutions? Because then you will have to, I'm sure they all have a very different way of working. The mechanisms change, right? So when you're working with, let's say, an ICICI versus a Grameen bank, how do you guys then?
But that's the opportunity. Right? So if it was so easy, then people would have done it. Right?
Absolutely.
So, I mean, see, it is about, for example, we have a product for seamless integrations, right? It's a fairly platform-driven product, and we have engineers with few configurations can actually make something go live, right? So we look at different patterns and we learn from that, and we see how much of these we can bake it into the platform, right? So that the lead time for us to take a new bank live, at least on the tech side, is relatively small, right?
Sure.
Now there might still be other challenges, like making sure that we get the adequate required information from each of these banks. Sure, some of it might take time, but the more you standardize things, the more easier it becomes. So you can handle many things in flight because your effort is not that much.
Sure. So from a hiring standpoint, it's a good time to ask you this question with what's happening around us. Are you still hiring for PayU?
Yeah, so see, PayU is definitely a company which looks for good talent, and at any point, there are premium roles, and we certainly look at constantly hiring. However, we have hired so much in this year that kind of at least in a good position that our headroom for growth is not that much.
Right.
Also, we did a slight amount of right sizing a couple of months back, right? But yeah, the premium hiring continues, right? But I might categorize that we are a little slow.
Sure. So what do you look for? If people enjoyed this conversation from Naren, want to join your team, and they say, hey, I want to work with this person, what are the few things you look for?
So the few things that I look for are, again, based on my experience, tend to weigh in more on the will part of it, right? So I look for people who have a strong urge to succeed, right?
Sure.
Like, in spite of the constraints around them, right? So the constraints could be tech, constraint could be people, constraint could be business environment, and so on, right? But people who show the willingness to still find solutions and make the right impact, I think that is the primary thing that I would look for, right? And while it's at an abstract level, like in terms of, like, if you distill it down further, it is about, like, at whatever you're doing, right? So once you commit to it, like, how do you make sure that you see it end to end, right? So that's how it translates into your day-to-day life, right? See, it's also important that people have the urge to learn from every experience, right?
Correct.
So you may succeed, you may not succeed today, but what is your takeaway from that? What do you like? How do you make sure that like you get better with this experience, right? So I think that's the other key thing that I would look for. It's a given that there is tech competency that we would always evaluate, and people have to meet those needs. But it is this attitude, right? Usually I mostly ask people about, hey, tell me what is the aha moment in your previous experience, like, right now. What is it, that one thing that you're proud of?
Okay.
Right. For me, that tells a lot on how people have overcome adversities, right? So what impact that they have created.
Sure.
And what interest levels they have, what is their motivation, right?
Right.
So that's really what we look
Oh,
for.
very interesting. And what kind of a leader are you if they had to come and join you? What's your leadership style?
I'm hoping that it's the same that I've said so far. If my leadership is about giving a lot of room for people,
Okay.
right? So I believe that
In autonomy.
providing autonomy and making sure that give the direction, but let them make their own choices, right? So that's what I would like to think.
Right.
And I also think that the best interjection I could do is to give, when possible, right? When people are stuck, be prescriptive, right? Saying that, hey, look, this is what I'm expecting from you, as opposed to, like, when they look for help, right? As opposed to making it vague and like confuse people, right?
Okay.
So that I feel many times helps. So they are stuck for a reason,
Sure.
and that's the time when it's best to give clarity. And if you're not able to do that, then probably you're expecting wrong things from your people, right?
Correct.
So that would be a good litmus test for yourself to
Correct.
see that, are you challenging your people correctly, or like you're putting unfair amount of burden on them.
Right. So I know you've seen weathered a lot more storms, right? Depending on the kind of timeline that you've had. So would you have any words that you'd like to give to people who've currently gone through this storm? What would be your suggestion or advice for them, for youngsters, for anybody?
Right. It's a tough time for sure. And if there's any takeaway, I would say that have patience, things will change.
Correct.
And the only thing that we can all do at this point is, whatever you're doing, right, give it your 100%, right? So do it with sincerity. Show the kind of willingness to make it happen, right? So that's the only thing that you can control. You don't control the environment. So don't get overly anxious about, what's the situation of your company or your industry or your business.
Correct.
Right? So what is in your control, give it your best and do it with sincerity.
Wow, well said. Would you have anything for founders who are doing these startups, who are also equally anxious looking at what's happening around?
I myself have never been a founder, so I mean, they probably would know more.
But as a tech leader, would you have anything to share?
See, the one thing I would say is, look out for good talent just for the current variations or current disruptions. Like, taking hasty decisions on talent might cost a lot, right? So just do weigh in terms of whether like probably you have to wait out some more time, and then your efforts will pay off, right? So don't take hasty decisions, right? So like make calculative decisions, right? So that's one thing I would say when it comes to
very
talent.
interesting. So you're asking them to not be reactive with what's happening, with what people are reading about, but to wait it out, watch what's good for them.
Correct.
Very interesting proposition. Naren, thank you so much for being on the show. Before we wind up, are there any last words or few suggestions that you want to share?
Again, thanks for inviting me. It's been a pleasure talking here, and I wish that we pass through this phase pretty quickly, and hopefully everybody is able to do something really creative and amazing for India.
Absolutely. Likewise, that's what even I have in mind as well for people. Thank you so much for being on our show, Naren. It was wonderful talking to you. Really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.